Welcome everyone to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. We have been meeting every morning, every Sunday morning for over a decade and a half. And now that we are on Zoom, I should say good afternoon and good evening to those of you who are at other time zones. I should say that today is the presidential election day in Bolivia. And for 20 years, Bolivia has had a ruling socialist party. Today's headlines on the New York Times says that the 20-year rule of the socialists in Bolivia will probably come to an end. And for one side, they'll disagree with the New York Times predictions. But today, we're going to talk about a very important subject. But before I get into that, I should say that these weekly programs are organized by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, the ICSS. This session is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and a link to our website, with a link to our website. And our website is ICSSmarks.org. So come and visit our website. My name is Roger Harris. I'm on the program committee that organizes these regular weekly presentations. Sunday mornings at the Marxist Forums has been a platform for diverse presentations of interest to the left. The program committee believes in the continuing values of Marx, and most importantly, the broad Marxist tradition. But you don't have to be a Marxist to join us on Sunday mornings, or even to be present or to give a presentation. And so please sign up for our mail notifications if you haven't already. Find out about future programs, past programs. Contact us through our website, icsmarks.org. And donations are always welcome, as well as feedback. Before we start, I want to remind everyone that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. And as such, we wish that we show respect for other participants, the moderator, and the speaker. So please note that the opinions expressed are those of the speaker and the participants, and they do not necessarily represent the ICS or the Marxist Forum. Today, our topic for today is an acutely timely topic, and indeed an existential topic: the imminence of nuclear war. Our speaker, Gerry Condon, will address 80 years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Are we on the verge of another nuclear war? Gerry is a Vietnam-era veteran, a war resister. He's the former president and current national board member of Veterans for Peace, VFP. And he's the chair of the Golden Rule Peace Boat, which is right now in the San Francisco Bay and is sailing actually today and sailing for another few days. And Gerry will be telling us a bit about the Golden Rule and its anti-nuclear mission. Gerry is currently the president of the Golden Rule Committee. And he's also on the steering committee of the Peace in Ukraine Coalition. He's on the board of the Task Force on the Americas, and he's on the advisory board of the U.S. Peace Council. Back in 1968, Gerry refused Army orders to deploy in Vietnam. He was court-martialed and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He then fled to Sweden, where he worked with the American Deserters Committee, and then to Canada, where he worked with AMEX-Canada War Resistance Collective. So that's a little bit of the background to Gerry. And I should also add that I very much welcome you back to the Marxist Forum, Gerry. You've been here for a number of times. It's always a pleasure. And Gerry, quite honestly, is one of the really great leaders, national leaders of the peace movement in the United States, and a person who is very good at creating unity, which we very much need in the peace movement. So with that introduction, Gerry, it's all yours.
Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to talk about nuclear weapons. It's 80 years since the U.S. nuclear bombing of the civilian populations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I always like to put it that way. People, you hear people say 80 years since Hiroshima. Well, Hiroshima is still here. It's shorthand for what happened then, but I think it's good to spell out what happened then. The U.S. bombed civilian populations. These were not military targets. It was unnecessary because as Japan was already attempting to surrender and end the war. The Truman administration decided to go ahead and drop these 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki for a number of reasons. One, they were actually experimenting with their new nuclear bombs. The first one they dropped on Hiroshima was a uranium bomb. The second one on Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. So there's a little bit of difference. They wanted to see compare and see how they would do. They were also trying to intimidate the Soviet Union, actually keep the Soviets from making further progress. The Soviets had entered the war against Japan and were threatening to enter and occupy Japan, and they wanted to end the war before that happened. And of course, they wanted to show the Soviet Union and the rest of the world what they had. A nuclear weapon that they could use to intimidate the rest of the world. Well, in the subsequent years, Russia or the Soviet Union also gained that technology and had their own nuclear weapons, as did the United Kingdom, France, and China. So, those 5 countries that had nuclear weapons to start out with, 3 of them were imperialist colonial powers, and 2 were emerging socialist nations. And the 5 countries who had nuclear weapons became the permanent members of the UN Security Council, which was the United Nations was formed around that same time. So that's interesting. And the basis for them being permanent members was that they had nuclear weapons. And so they remain today the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. There are now 9 nuclear-armed nations, and many of them are actually in military confrontation with one another. And it's quite remarkable that there's not been another nuclear war. And how is this explained? Well, some say the absence of another nuclear war proves that nuclear deterrence is working. And to some extent, that's true. These nations are rightfully afraid of nuclear conflagration, which would obliterate their societies and even destroy all life on planet Earth. But with the escalated military confrontations today, even the possibility of a world war, how long can deterrence work? In reality, a fair amount of luck has helped humanity avert nuclear catastrophe until now. We came very close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A political officer on a Russian submarine that was out of communication and uncertain if a nuclear war had already began, called off a missile launch at the last minute. And another Russian military technician, on another occasion, suspicious of an errant radar reading that appeared to show incoming U.S. missiles, called off another imminent nuclear strike. Could just as easily have gone the other way. Many experts worry that it will be an accidental nuclear launch that ends us all. That is all the more concerning as artificial intelligence is now being applied to nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, decreasing the decision-making time to split seconds and removing human oversight. What could go wrong? 2025 also marks 80 years from the end of World War II and the defeat of the German fascists by Russia, the United States, or the Soviet Union, I should say, the United States and European allies. 80 years since Russian and U.S. troops liberated thousands of prisoners from German concentration camps, much to the horror of the world, which reacted to calls of with calls of never again. But now we see concentration camps being built in the U.S. Isn't that why ICE now has a larger budget than any branch of the military? larger than the entire current federal prison system. They're building concentration camps for undocumented workers who they demonize as murderers, rapists, gang members, and terrorists. And as most of us know, the vast majority of immigrants who have been violently taken from their jobs and families, imprisoned and deported, have no criminal records whatsoever, are productive, respected members of their community. And these concentration camps that are being built may have some other prisoners in mind in the future. So we're facing authoritarianism with distinct overtones of white supremacy, while European politicians are clamoring for war with Russia and more military spending. Israel, purportedly a safe haven for persecuted Jewish people, a land without people for a people without land, is escalating its blatant genocide in Gaza. Israel is also a nuclear power. And the United States helped Israel gain nuclear technology, and it's helped to shield Israel from any nuclear accountability. Israel has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Its arsenal of nuclear weapons is not inspected by the International Atomic Energy Commission, the IAEA, which has actually been weaponized to support the rationale for war, U.S. rationale for war against Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Interestingly, just before the day before Israel attacked Iran on Thursday, June 12th, the IAEA announced a resolution critical of Iran's nuclear program. So this is probably not a coincidence. Unlike Iran, Israel actually has nuclear weapons, and the question is, will they use them against Iran? Or will the U.S. use nuclear weapons against Iran? The Israeli government of right-wing extremists has already shown us the depths of depravity they're willing to go to. And of course, all the Arab neighbors know Israel is the only nuclear-armed nation in the Middle East. As Daniel Ellsberg famously said, nuclear weapons are used every day. They're like a gun you point at somebody's head. It's all about domination. Aside from luck, it's been nuclear arms treaties that have held nuclear war in check. In recent years, however, the U.S. has shredded most of these treaties and missed many opportunities for peace, including this interesting little list, which is from the Nuclear Posture Review of Veterans for Peace, and thanks to Alice Slater, who's present here today. Reagan rejected President Gorbachev's offer for both countries to eliminate all their nuclear weapons if the U.S. would stop deployment of a Star Wars missile defense system in space. President Clinton refused President Putin's offer to cut our massive nuclear arsenals to 1,500 bombs and to call on all the other nuclear-armed states to negotiate the elimination of all nuclear weapons in exchange for the U.S. not placing missile sites in Romania. President George W. Bush walked out of the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and put a missile base in Romania. President Trump placed another missile base in Poland. President Bush in 2008 and President Obama in 2014 blocked any discussion of Russian and Chinese proposals for a space weapons ban. President Obama rejected President Putin's offer to negotiate a treaty to ban cyber war. President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. President Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and placed sanctions on Iran. And from President Clinton through President Trump, the U.S. has never ratified the 1992 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which has been ratified by Russia. So taken in their totality, these U.S. moves constitute an attempt to gain nuclear superiority very clearly, including the possibility of launching a first strike nuclear attack. pulling out of the ABM and INF treaties in particular indicate U.S. intentions to threaten Russia with nuclear war. Is it any wonder that Russia, faced with the prospect of U.S. NATO troops and nuclear weapon systems stationed on its very borders with Ukraine, felt compelled to take military action? Now Russia is stuck in a bloody war that has been constantly escalated by the U.S. and NATO, and the U.S. has rejected multiple opportunities for peace talks since the war began. So Russia asks for neutrality for Ukraine and respect for the rights of Ukraine's Russia-speaking population. Over 1 million casualties later, the bloody trench and drone war drags on, not because of Russian intransigence, because of the aggressive U.S. policy of full spectrum dominance in every corner of the globe. And I maybe should pause there to comment that there is some hope from the recent meeting with Trump and Putin. Certainly kind of lowers the level of tension, and it appears that there may be progress towards actually ending that war with a substantial peace deal. Of course, that remains to be seen, but the meeting that so many people predicted would produce nothing at all seems to actually have perhaps been laying the basis for finally ending the war in Ukraine. We shall see about that, and we can talk about that later for sure. A couple other things I want to mention. On June 1st of this year, a U.S.-supported Ukrainian drone attack on nuclear bombers in Russia almost triggered a nuclear war. And hardly anybody knows about this. According to a Russian general who spoke with former CIA geopolitical analyst Larry Johnson, the world was even closer to nuclear war than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Russian bombers were openly visible on the airport tarmac in accordance with the new START treaty, which is designed to prevent a nuclear first strike by either Russia or the U.S. The last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia is due to expire this coming February, but it has already been drone bombed. And also significantly in terms of the Putin-Trump meeting on Friday, they talked about wanting to begin negotiating arms control, renewing and negotiating new arms control treaties. So that's also good news if it's followed through, and it's very significant. Let's see. While we may be seeing the Ukraine war finally winding down, at the same time, the U.S. continues to support the genocide in Gaza, continues to and has actually bombed Yemen and Iran, two countries that have been in support of the Palestinian struggle. As I think you all know, the Pentagon is planning to go to war against China. And why are they going to go to war against China? Basically because China has prospered and is doing so well that it threatens to overtake the U.S. economy. And the U.S. ruling class, the so-called deep state, is determined to be number one. And they're willing to bomb China back a few decades just so they can remain number one. Not because China is otherwise threatening the U.S. or anybody else. So this war is openly being planned, virtually openly. They're putting all the pieces into place throughout the Pacific. The Pentagon has figured out, however, that it probably cannot win a conventional war against China, certainly not in China's own neighborhood. So it's planning to use nuclear weapons. They're talking about the possibility of an overwhelming first strike against China as the opening of that war, or possibly using only tactical nuclear weapons somehow. Those cute little weapons that are several times more powerful than what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. U.S. war planners have recently asked Australia and Japan to declare what military resources they will bring to bear in a war against China. And the U.S. held talks with Japan recently, of all nations, to discuss how they will coordinate their efforts after a nuclear strike on China. Among the issues they discussed were how they could best manage public opinion after a nuclear war. We are, facing a real crisis right now in the absence of nuclear arms treaties, the U.S. confrontation with Russia, Iran, and China. And I think that it's very, very important for anti-imperialists to join this struggle. I find it kind of interesting that for the most part, the anti-nuclear movement in the United States over a number of decades, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, because there's certainly some significant exceptions. For the most part, it's been more pacifist part of the peace movement that's taken on the issue of nuclear weapons, whereas you actually don't see a whole lot of discussion about it in anti-imperialist and socialist circles. And I find that very curious, and I don't know why that is exactly. I have a few ideas, and maybe I'm even totally wrong about that, but I would like to throw that out for discussion. Because I think basically if we don't have an understanding of imperialism and the U.S. strategy for dominating the world, 850 military bases, and the commitment to have full spectrum dominance in every part of the globe. And by the way, that 850 military bases compares with, I think, these are 4 military bases, 5 for Russia and 1 for China, just to put it in perspective. So we definitely have a sprawling, aggressive empire. And until the U.S. foreign policy changes radically to one that respects the sovereignty of other nations, then there's very little chance that we're going to be able to get rid of nuclear weapons. Russia and China are certainly not going to get rid of their nuclear weapons as long as they're being threatened by U.S. nuclear weapons. And other countries may decide that they're going to acquire nuclear weapons as well. So it's really on us in the U.S. to take the first step. I mean, if we had a president that had the political support and/or the courage, necessary courage, we could declare that we're going to get rid of half our nuclear weapons unilaterally and challenge the rest of the world to do the same, and then to take the next step until we get rid of all nuclear weapons. It really would have to almost have to come from the United States, and but that means that's not going to happen until we have some kind of a revolution in this country where the people are really in power, and so that's the challenge before us. I should just finish by mentioning that the Golden Rule anti-nuclear sailboat, which famously attempted to sail into the Marshall Islands in 1958 to stop nuclear weapons testing there and U.S. nuclear weapon testing, and is now a national project of Veterans for Peace. It's here in the San Francisco Bay Area for the month of August. We're in Berkeley right now. We've been taking a lot of our friends out sailing. We've had yesterday the Task Force on the Americas went sailing. Today, the Sonoma Veterans for Peace, minus Susan Lamont, is sailing. We had Code Pink the other day. We have the Northern California TPS Coalition. We're going to be taking out the People's Arms Embargo later this week, and the Korea, the Comfort Women's Justice Coalition, and others. So we have a very intersectional approach, even while we're our mission is to educate people about the growing danger of nuclear war, to push for more support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We're making all these important connections that Veterans for Peace makes to the war in Gaza, to the increasing state repression in the United States, linking all of these issues. So we have a pretty full schedule. We're going to be in Richmond for several days this week with lots of activities. We actually have a flotilla of boats that's going to be sailing around Alcatraz, which Trump wants to return to be a prison. And past Chevron, which is polluting the Richmond community while sending oil to Israel as it carries out genocide. So we're making all these connections. We're going to be back in San Francisco and San Mateo. Got a bunch of events. You can go to our website, vfpgoldenrule.org, to see our schedule of events, and you might have a chance to come out and see the boat. But at any rate, the next few years are really critically important years for all of humanity. I think we got to survive the Trump administration, survive a period of confrontation and the very real danger of nuclear war. But it's like I said, I'm breathing a little bit easier today after the Trump-Putin meeting, because they're talking about wanting to restore nuclear arms control treaties as well as ending the war in Ukraine. And that's a step in the right direction, even if the intention of the U.S. is to put more resources into its wars against China and Iran. So I'll leave it there on that happy note, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Gerry, and thank you for this very sobering report. And I'll be looking forward to the Q&A, which will be in a moment after these announcements, and address some of these questions of we're entering what you said, the critical years for all humanity. Let me just make a few quick announcements about what's coming up at the Marxist Forum. Next week, August 24th, next Sunday, we're going to have Carl Schanzes speaking. He will be speaking on a really kind of interesting topic, socialism with Russian characteristics. I'm going to be really looking forward to hearing that one. He's an expert on Russia, and will be an active blogger. And so he'll be a very interesting speaker, and I really recommend tuning in for him. The following week, August 31st, Emmanuel Ness will be returning. He's a professor at the City University of New York, very distinguished published Marxist and activist. He's a union activist, and he will be talking about his most recent book, Migration as Economic Imperialism. And he'll have a lot to talk about in terms of the migrant crisis here in the United States, how that's being treated, and generally how the issue of migration is part of a larger imperialist project, and how that fits into the imperialist project, and particularly how to organize against it. Emmanuel has done tremendous work internationally. He is an adjunct professor in both, I believe, India and in China, and is very close to the labor movements there. So he'll be reporting on that. Following that will be September 7th, more on the labor struggle with farm workers by Mary Jane Galviso. And Mary Jane Galviso is a longtime activist in that field. And then on September 14th, returning to the library will be Grover Furr speaking about the Soviet period. So please join us for those programs. Now we'll go into the Q&A, and as those of you who are familiar with our conventions here, and for those of you who are new, we ask the people to raise your hand, and to raise your hand, the way to do that is to go to the bottom of your screen at the taskbar there. Under reactions, there's a place where you can raise your hand, and I will take questions as people raise their hands. We ask you to spend about 2 minutes, either making a statement or making a comment or making a question. If you make a question, please keep one question at a time for each time we call on you, and then Gerry will have as much time as he would need to respond to your questions, and then we'll continue on that way. So I see the Gene Rule screen is has a hand up, and I not only see Gene Rule's screen with a hand up, but with a new face there. So Gene Rule, and who do you have with you? You're muted, Gene.
Okay, yeah. Well, I want to introduce my granddaughter, Autumn Garrison, who is a college student. She's from um, Washington State, and she's been in our program before. She's also we have in she's going to be speaking in our forum sometime this fall. I don't know how much pressure I can put on her to get a clear date from her. But at any rate, she does have a question, so I'll just let her ask her question.
I was curious how AI is being used, if you could elaborate that on that with nuclear weapons.
Good question, but I actually don't have the answer. Sorry to say, Autumn, I don't know too much about that. Just heard that it's being done. But it'd be really interesting to learn more about that. Maybe AI can tell us. Maybe somebody else here knows more about that.
We did have a program on that just last week. But on the militarization of AI. That is a fairly specialized topic. And Gerry's specialty is organizing the anti-war movement and alerting people and doing political education. So our next speaker, our next questioner is Raj Sahai. Raj, it's all yours.
Hi, Gerry. Thank you for your presentation. I completely agree with you. But I wanted to ask you, I see Trump a little differently, and I would like your comment on that. I see Trump basically adjusting the United States to the reality of the world, that this is a multipolar world, and nuclear weapons are now in numerous states, and some of them have credible delivery systems, particularly Russia and China. And recent exchange of hostilities between Pakistan and India was also ended quickly, not because Trump intervened, which he tries to claim credit for, but because both nations were nuclear armed and they're right next to each other. So they ended it, they didn't want to carry it forward further. So my question is, how do you see Trump? I actually see Trump, we have a better chance of having some kind of control, even though his history is pretty bad about weapons in European theater and so forth. So I may be wrong, but I just like to know your view on the arms control and Trump.
That's another tough question, and I could only speculate, to tell you the truth. My general opinion regarding Trump is that I only expect the worst from him, and I remember when he, in his first term, when he toured the Pentagon and asked the generals, "Well, we've got these nuclear weapons. Why don't we use them?" And he's threatened to use them. He even responded to a little social media pissing contest with Dmitry Medvedev in Russia recently by announcing that he was on social media that he's sending 2 nuclear submarines closer to Russia, which of course made no particular sense anyway, because those have intercontinental nuclear weapons that can attack Russia from anywhere. But you know, I'm encouraged that he wants to get out of the Ukraine war, and it looks like he's gradually listening and hearing what the Russians are actually saying. And the fact that they're talking about restoring nuclear arms control, I mean, I imagine it's really that initiative is coming from Russia, not from Ukraine, but apparently he wants to have better relations with Russia. He wants to have economic advantages from that relationship. But I don't expect any consistency from Trump, and I don't really share the kind of the implicit hope that you seem to you know, comparing him. Of course, he is different than Biden, and different, maybe isn't attached to the same ideologies and same forces. But you know, on the other hand, we've had a bipartisan aggressive imperialist foreign policy for many years, and I expect we will for several years more. And I just hope we can survive that. But I'd like to hear maybe what other people think. But I do think also it could be going kind of down a deep hole to get into a discussion of our opinions about Trump. But I feel very cautious. He'll make a good move one day, and then 2 days later, this time I'm hoping it'll hold, that there's actually some serious momentum for a peace with Russia, and that, you know, that could, if it's not immediately followed by attacks on China, that could be a good thing.
I just wanted to say that I'm not having higher hope, but I think he's recognizing the limit of US power. That's the only good thing, as reflected in his attempt to end the Ukraine conflict. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. I see Janet Corbin, and then the citizen, please.
Yes, hi, Gerry. So when you were on this program, I think it was January of 2023, I urged you to fly a Palestinian flag on the Golden Rule. Did that ever happen, given that Israel has been an undeclared nuclear state and has been waging a full-blown genocide in Gaza? Also, have you worked with Scott Ritter, who has focused on nuclear arms control for decades? I have his contact information if you need it.
Well, there was a Palestinian flag flying on the Golden Rule just 2 days ago, and we're talking about the genocide in Gaza wherever we go. Had some contact with Scott Ritter, haven't worked closely with him.
Okay, good. Citizen, you're up.
Yes, good day. There have been, I've raised this in previous ICSS forums about nuclear war. There's been prophecies, I call them prophecies, about war against China and Iran. Iran, at least since 2003, as far back as I cared to go in my email list to check it, I didn't have time to go back any further. And with war against Iran, it was always this week for sure, since 2003. Michael Clare said that we'd be in a war against China by December 2022. KJ No, a guest on his show and a friendly acquaintance of mine, said we would be in war against China by March 2025. All those dates have come and gone, along with others. John Bellamy, a guest in this forum, said that we'd be in a war with China by 2027. A former self-defense analyst on the PBS NewsHour, as I said before, certainly no left-wing rag, said that if the U.S. had a war with China, at least a conventional war, in the South China Sea, the U.S. would probably lose 2 aircraft carriers within a week. I do want to say that although I don't go along with this war with China stuff, or Russia, there was a very interesting 13-page article in the June 2023 Harper's Magazine. Why are we in Ukraine? On the dangers of American hubris. And I thought that was a very interesting article because the article said in an escalation of a conventional war, or the start of one with Ukraine or China or Russia, many in the Defense Department apparently believe we have a first strike capability against Russia. So I would like to ask you this question that I've asked other guests on related topics. China is, after all, a scientifically and technologically advanced intercontinental thermonuclear ballistic missile superpower. And even a few thermonuclear missiles getting through can ruin our whole day. So my question is, which parts of what states is the U.S. prepared to see obliterated, and how many tens of millions of Americans is the U.S. prepared to see incinerated and otherwise killed in some Dr. Strange-Lovian hypothetical war with China or Russia? Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll take that as largely a rhetorical question. But the crazies that are the neocons that are surrounding Trump right now and have surrounded Biden many people believe they'd rather see a nuclear war and nuclear annihilation than to lose their dominance and supremacy in the world. So I think that they're not necessarily can't be expected to have a realistic assessment and they could easily lead us into a nuclear war. I would just add to that, since you mentioned we're waiting for the war with Iran. Well, the U.S. bombed Iran, was it this year? Was it late last year, or was it already this year? So I believe it's this year. The U.S. has bombed Iran, and Israel and the U.S. are clearly not finished with their war against Iran. So I would say they're already at war with Iran, even though it's not as serious as it could become. And hopefully the wiser heads will prevail, and the U.S. will not launch a war against China. But as KJ No can tell you in great detail, all the pieces, all the resources that are being marshaled, and all the U.S. allies that are being organized for exactly such a war. And now they're talking about 2027 as a window. And they're also saying, well, China's strength continues to grow, and if we don't do it soon, then we won't be able to do it. Well, maybe it'll never happen. Let's hope. We should all be pressing for it not to be happening. There's an incredible amount of anti-China propaganda that has gone on for the last decade in this country, where many people in the U.S. would support a war against China. So we have our work to do as Code Pink and others among us are doing a lot of work, educational work, telling people China is not our enemy, and there's no reason for us to go to war against China. And you're right that such a war would be insane and could lead to massive destruction of much of the world.
Well, if I can just briefly add, KJ No's prophecy, along with the other prophecies of war with China, have come and gone. And with regard to the U.S. Token bombings of Iran and the Iranian counter bombings, those were telegraphed well in advance. Each side was told, get your troops out of the way. And those were just token bombings that didn't do anything and actually proved that the U.S. didn't want to go to war with Iran.
Right. Well, KJ knows not prophesying. He's just pointing out what the U.S. is doing.
His dates have come and gone. He predicted.
I don't think
by March of this year, it's come and gone. These are like religious prophecies. But
all right,
people
okay.
get a chance to ask a question.
All right, we heard you.
Let's go on and then we can come back to this. So let's see. Right now, I'm seeing Kit's hand up, followed by Norma.
Okay. Good morning, Gary. Thank you for representing VIP and for speaking here. And also thank you for the golden rule. My question is, I have a couple of questions. One is, repeat again how many nuclear bases around the world. AI estimated 12,241 nuclear warheads possessed by 9 countries, but how many bases are there? And then any stats on how much damage Ukraine actually did on the Russian Air Force recently? One source called it Russian nuclear air power and said it was 30%. That 30% of it was damaged, but do you have any stats? Thank you.
Yeah, on the previous, how many bases? You hear a lot of numbers thrown out, but they range from 750 to over 1,000, depending on how it's counted, I guess. Some of them are rather small installations, and some of them are very substantial. But yeah, the number I go with, which is, I think, relatively conservative and more or less right, is 850 U.S. foreign military bases. I think that nobody except the Russians know exactly how much damage was done by that attack on their strategic bombers. I've heard it was probably relatively superficial, or maybe lost or damaged a few planes, but probably not. But we don't really know. Russia hasn't revealed that for its own reasons. But it was very interesting to hear just recently a Russian general reportedly saying that was much more serious than people realized, and that was very close to a nuclear war. Russia was, when their strategic bombers were attacked, what would you expect? What they might think would be coming next. They might have thought that was an initial blow that would preface a more serious attack from the U.S.
Okay. I think you've covered some of that. Up next is Norma Harrison. Please, Norma.
Hi, Gerry. It's always terrible to see you.
Thank you.
And we're very grateful as usual, or very appreciative. As you know, I am very supportive of education, and what I think is that it's possible that Autumn's question might have been developed, and that's how education goes. Oh, I did one thing and now it's developed into another. Is that what's going on in Autumn's and Jean's attempt to be heard? Is follow up on what Autumn asked us earlier? You don't know? Okay,
I don't quite understand the question. So, yeah,
what happened is that Autumn asked a question and it did not get developed, and I wondered if she's had time to think that she needed to add something, because if she did, I'd say let her go before me.
Okay, let's go on to the
because
next
I have a comment.
So Norma,
I have a comment. I did
okay,
what
why don't you make your comment then?
Yes. With regard to the Ukraine horror. They never mention that it's just another war against communism, an over 100-year plus war against communism. This idea that we're thrust into a time when communism versus capitalism is constantly on the issues, and it's not mentioned. And this is not so much a question for you, Gerry, as a comment for people. Thank you.
Gerry, do you want to say anything, or should we go on to Judith? Gerry, are you still there? Let's see. I'm looking at the gallery. I think Gerry has
Looks like he's been dropped.
is dropped. And I assume that he'll be getting back in. And I would, while we're waiting for Gerry to get in, and apologize for this interruption, is one of the questions I think that we all need to face is why has this issue of nuclear war, perhaps the most important existentialist issue facing humanity, become sort of normalized, that people don't seem to be very concerned about it. And so that's one of those questions I would ask. And Judith, do you want to begin by perhaps talking about what you wanted to ask, and while we wait for Gerry to get back
Gerry's
on?
back. Oh, he's back. Can you hear me?
Yes, Gerry is back on. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Can you?
My computer was plugged into an outlet that was turned off. So I ran out of battery, but I'm back. And I'm sorry I missed most of your comment, Norma. Mentioned
Let's move on.
My comment ended up being that the recognition that the 100 plus years war that's been going on has been communism versus capitalism, and it's not said, it's not mentioned. That's, you know, it's focused now on Ukraine, but in general, that's what's going on. And as I said, you'd probably, this is not so much addressed to you, it's just put out into the group.
Okay, thank you. And so Judith, you were up next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, I missed most of your talk. But I was astounded to hear you speak as if the United States was realistically going to nuclear bomb China. Well, first of all, I want to preface this by saying that I follow Brian Berletic, and I agree with most of what he says, which is based on policy papers that he reads when no one else will, from think tanks that are working for the military, for the Pentagon, and the Trump. Trump. I don't believe that Trump, even though he's a very large personality, I don't think that he's making these decisions himself. So whatever he says, that's just for show. So what Brian Berletic thinks, and I agree with him, is that they do want to tone down the aid to the Ukraine because they want to concentrate on the upcoming war with China. And what you said about the various bases that they have and the relations with the other countries, that's all true. And but it doesn't mean that they're going to end the war with the Ukraine, because they've thrown it to the European allies, and they're supposed to carry on. Okay, all right. So the other thing is that it doesn't make sense to me that they would bomb China with nuclear weapons, because not only because of the possibility of retaliation, but they want to asset strip China. China has those famous rare earth minerals. They have all kinds of things. They have incredible technology. Their universities are top notch. They have an incredible human capital. And why would the United States destroy this when they covered it? Okay, that's it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they won't. I mean, I don't think it's inevitable, and I don't think it's necessarily been determined. But it's a contingency plan. It's part of the war planning that's going on right now, and it's definitely on the table, the possibility of using nuclear weapons against China, because they don't believe they can win a conventional war against China. Well, maybe they'll get smart and finally won't go to war against China at all.
Well, it's possible that it's just they're just trying to threaten them to make them scared, but maybe they don't. Maybe they do. I'm sure they know that. Maybe they just want to weaken China
Mhm.
and to force it to make concessions of some kind.
Possibly so, but they're putting an awful lot of resources. And by the way, the pivot to Asia, so-called pivot to Asia, which means putting more and more military resources aimed at surrounding China, so-called containing China and preparing for war against China, that began with Obama, the Obama administration. So it's a bipartisan project. There's an awful lot of resources being put into it. I don't think it's kind of an idle bluff, but I'm not making any predictions or prophecies. And if anything, I think we should be adding our voices to call for no war against China whatsoever.
Well, thank you. And then Richard Wright, it's all yours.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, I can hear myself. Oh, hope there's no feedback. Anyways, thanks for the presentation. I got a lot of questions, but time is short and all that. You mentioned, or you had a question about why the anti-nuclear forces seem to have dissipated since for over the last 30 or 40 years. And I assume you've come up with some assumptions on that, or some hypotheses. Could you maybe elaborate on why what's happening, why we aren't getting that word out? Thank you.
Well, I was kind of trying to ask that question of you and the group here, but you're right. I didn't actually point out that generally speaking, the anti-nuclear movement had diminished some, but I think that's true. And what I was asking is why aren't there more socialist and anti-imperialist voices and forces in that anti-nuclear struggle? So that those questions kind of overlap, I guess.
Could I
But
interrupt?
I don't really have the answer so much as I'm posing the question.
Could I give you maybe like one direction that I think is going on?
Please.
And that is that we've had a very sharp rise in military occupations. There's a lot more parts of of the population that are being paid by the military industrial contractors. Hence, you've got a vested interest in them maintaining jobs. And, I've seen that personally, actually. So that to me, and not to mention that the wages have, I think people are more concerned about their living standards than they are about, this amorphous thing called nuclear weapons. Anyways,
Yeah, I think that's true. It's also, it's not exactly a bread and butter issue, at least, although it is. I was asked by, KGO, ABC TV news came out to interview us when the Golden Rule arrived in San Francisco last week, and the interviewer, the woman, was asking me, well, how is this a local issue? And I said, well, most people have a hard time seeing it as a local issue. It's something that they have a lot of other concerns. Nuclear weapons seems pretty abstract, and people feel powerless to do anything about it at any rate. But it is a local issue, at least in the sense that the military budget, which is now like $1 trillion under Trump, and $100 billion going this year alone to modernize, quote unquote, modernize nuclear weapons, which means to build new weapons, new nuclear weapons, including so-called more usable tactical nuclear weapons. That's stealing money from our social programs, and we see that happening pretty dramatically right before our eyes right now. So, and of course, it's nuclear weapons is also a local issue in the sense that a nuclear war would destroy our local community, but it still seems so abstract and out of reach. I think somehow we have to make it a more immediate concern for people, and exactly how to do that, I'd love to hear some more ideas here. The way we do it right now is with the Golden Rule Peace Boat, which is got this incredible anti-nuclear legacy, and is a story that inspires people, and it makes it easier to talk about nuclear weapons and the prospect of nuclear war. But much more needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just
we need people like Autumn. We need the young people to take it up. Actually, there's a lot of young people involved in the climate crisis movement, and I think that if we can talk about the nuclear war and climate catastrophe as a duo existential threat, and try to get those young people who are concerned about the climate equally involved with pressing for the abolition of nuclear weapons, that would be a big step. So I'm looking forward to hear what Autumn and Eugene may have more to say. And perhaps that's Eugene's hand up now. So, I know they're waiting to have their say, as along with others here. You're muted, Eugene.
Yeah, you can go there.
I'm sharing a computer with Autumn here. So she commented earlier, but I do have something to say on this general issue because, China, back in 1966, I believe, Mao realized that they couldn't depend on the Soviet Union to defend them. So Mao said, basically, we need to have this thing or else we'll be bullied. And their strategy was different because they didn't try to match the Soviet Union or United States on numbers of nuclear weapons. They had enough nuclear weapons hidden around so that they could survive an attack and retaliate. That was their strategy. So that was a much different strategy. And while they did this, what they did is they vowed that they would never, under any circumstances, initiate a nuclear war, and they would never attack a non-nuclear enemy or country. So this is a model that the Chinese have, and it's much more sane than our particular thing of our, our mad or nuts policies that we use here in the United States. So I wonder if you want to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. That's very interesting. They also have their nuclear warheads are detached from the missiles, so they're not like on a hair trigger alert that could risk an accidental nuclear war. And they have much fewer nuclear weapons. They're being accused of acquiring more and more nuclear weapons. I don't even know if that's really true. It hasn't been documented or established, but you hear it stated a lot that they're building more nuclear weapons. But they clearly have a defensive posture, as you point out.
Okay, thank you. I think Laura Wells is up next, followed by Jim. And as Gerry said, he really would like to get more feedback about some of these issues, because I think a lot of you folks have been involved in the movement and can comment as well. So Laura, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Gerry, and for the sale yesterday.
Yeah, I heard you were on the boat yesterday. We didn't get to see you for lunch, but
Yeah, I had to leave.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, that was great. And the conversation with the Task Force on the Americas friends were great conversations. So my question is that I've heard that there were, and you mentioned about the attempts at negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, but I wonder if you or someone could give me the references for that, because whenever I say it, people are really, that they haven't heard about it or whatever. So I would love to have some references about those negotiations that were foiled, whether they were by the US or the UK, Boris Johnson or whoever. So that would be my question.
Yeah, well, those are pretty well documented, Laura. So not hard to find. I mean, there was actually a prospect. The initial peace talks happened within a week of the Russian invasion, and they were Scots. And then there was the negotiations in Istanbul that were undermined, and they were very close to a reasonable agreement. And it's not hard to find the documentation and the dates. These are not.
Yeah, so I guess I would alter my question a little bit, knowing how bad the mainstream media is, but knowing how people who aren't particularly political want to see something from those sources, whether it's the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever. And if somebody could put in the chat links to those, that would be helpful to me, and I will look harder also myself. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Jim Dorencott, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. So back in the 80s, I came out of the Navy terrified of nuclear annihilation, what I saw our carriers doing. Like Ellsberg talked about, if you point a gun at somebody, you're using a gun. If you point a nuclear weapon at somebody, you're using a nuclear weapon. You don't have to set them off. And so I became coordinator of the nuclear freeze campaign in San Diego, major military industrial complex. I'm obviously a center lefty. We had to build a big tent. It was a global movement of extraordinariness that I don't think has been matched since then. And so they dismantled. Remember nuclear winter, Carl Sagan. The Russians were better informed about nuclear winter than the Americans were. So there was global understanding. And then they just slowly turned it from nuclear winter to nuclear fall. And the epitome, you know, when I went in the Navy, John Kennedy was the president. And he said at American University, a nuclear weapons power should never put another nuclear weapons power in a position of humiliating surrender or going to war. And that was the wisdom from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Biden, for the sake of the ruling class, the part of the ruling class that supported him to destroy Russia, breaking into 9 countries, was willing to risk that. And so they had to create this myth that Putin won't use nuclear weapons. Fortunately, Putin is calm and doesn't get into activity that would lead us in that way. In fact, one of the biggest tactical advantages they developed was these hypersonic missiles, which are amazingly powerful, but not nuclear. So the US completely miscalculated in pushing Putin around, didn't get a nuclear war so they could get their propaganda victory. And now the ruling class that's backing, the part of the ruling class that's backing Trump, is supporting ending the Ukraine war. And I think that is great. Even though Trump plans on taking down China, I think for us to finally end that war, and it's going to be tough because who wants to give Trump credit? But that is going to eliminate that possibility, which I think is more dangerous than the China situation. Because Biden was no John Kennedy. And so the other thing that I observed was that back in the day, the Germans, who were ground zero for nuclear war, led the anti-nuclear war movement, and the US caught up.
That's
They were
3
completely
minutes.
they were completely absent in this last round over Ukraine. So the whole global movement has been pushed back. And I'm hoping that it will come back. And I'll stop with that. Well, one other thing. Back in the day in San Diego, we had maps that showed the consequences of nuclear bombs going off in San Diego County. And we got tens of thousands of them spread around the city. That had an enormous impact on people when they could see that there are no survivors. And I think we need a digital version of that again. I think we have to really step it up in terms of educating people about the futility of nuclear war and stop thinking that people won't use nuclear weapons if there's an existential threat. I pass. I'll be interested in your comments, Gerry.
Yeah, good to see you, Jim. Those are all great comments. And you remind us once again that there really was a substantial anti-nuclear movement in the 80s. I mean, I actually was in New York City for the big march. It was 1 million people, or close to 1 million people, that marched that day. And there was a lot. Also, Gorbachev and Reagan actually dramatically reduced the number of nuclear weapons at that point in response to that movement. So, yeah, the question is what happened to it and how do we build it back up? How do we, there's so many other issues and struggles. How do we integrate the struggle against nuclear weapons with the other struggles that we're taking up? I think it's very important that we do so.
Yeah, thank you. There was Jim, particularly, those are very helpful comments, and your background, of course, is very, very important.
But I like the idea of a digital map showing the kind of damage that would happen with a nuclear war. I think that needs to be brought home.
Yeah. Okay, I see Sharon Rose has her hand up.
Yes, I just, thank you, Gerry. I just wanted to comment on the last thing you said, which was on my mind too. How to integrate the anti-nuclear perspective in the general peace movement that is growing. I think we absolutely need to have prioritize that task because I think it has over the years fallen somehow to the wayside. People talk about the threat of World War III, and I don't think a lot of people who talk about that don't understand what that will mean. And because world wars have not affected the American homeland. So 416,000 people, combatants, US combatants died in the Second World War. That number pales in comparison to the 40 million people in Europe and a greater number in Asia. Millions and millions of people. The American people just don't get that into their heads. And in addition, of course, our homeland was not affected except for Pearl Harbor, which we shouldn't discount, but I think you know what I mean. And I think that we need to talk about the difference between the old nuclear policy, which was mutually assured destruction, and the latest morphing of the nuclear policy into what Bellamy Foster called counterforce, and which is that they're planning they'll use tactical, so-called tactical nuclear weapons as a counterforce to any in a more localized area of the globe. That's their plan. But what World War III will mean is nuclear holocaust, including on this continent. So I think we have to prioritize much more when we are out there organizing in the peace movement. We have to prioritize talking about that. And I thank you for the Golden Rule.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful project.
Those are really good points, Sharon. You have to bring a sense of urgency. You know, part of the thing is when you talk about the possibility of nuclear war or even imminent nuclear war, you know, it's like you kind of can be too easily dismissed as being alarmist or being like, you know, the guy on the corner with the sign saying the end is near. And so we have to somehow find the right balance between coming across as alarmist, but just educating people. Well, look, this is actually in the war planning that's going on. These are the dangers that exist. All the nuclear arms treaties have been abrogated. There's no guardrails on here. We could all too easily go to nuclear war tomorrow by accident or otherwise. And so we have to definitely start scaling back, and but once again, ultimately means, from our perspective, I think ending U.S. imperial aggression around the world, because until that's dramatically reduced and reversed, the threat of nuclear war will always be with us.
Okay, good. We're getting close to the end, and I see 3 hands up, all second bites at the apple. If you can make your comments brief, appreciate that. And the order will be Citizen, Jean, and then Raj. So Citizen of the Planet.
Yes. So yes, I'd like to get back to the end is near. Prophecies date that come and go about war with China. You know, I think a lot of ordinary working people view all of this as an abstraction because they've heard for maybe decades now, I'm not sure, but maybe decades, that we're 30 seconds to midnight, we're 2 seconds to midnight, we're X seconds to midnight. for the end of the world, and it comes and goes, and ordinary people say, this has got nothing to do with me. So I do want to say that in the choice between going back to Trump and Hillary, that I did feel that we had two choices, rhetorically speaking, because I don't believe any of these prophecies, they've all come and gone. But that we had it when we went back to Trump and Hillary, or probably other Democrats too, maybe Biden, we had a choice between the end of this country or the end of the world. And it's interesting that Hillary would have taken us closer to at least the nuclear prefaces of an exchange with North Korea than Trump would have. I think in part because, well, she's just a warmonger, but in another part because as a female president, she would have felt that she had to show that she had bigger cojones than any male president. Trump would prefer to make deals rather than war, and we can see that repeatedly in his behavior. Trump also, taco, Trump always chickens out. Trump also bragged about sending his mighty nuclear subs to the coast of North Korea, but he didn't do anything. And the interesting thing was that the closer you got to South Korea, the less people were worried. And most people in South Korea weren't worried at all.
2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I'll just say I have to say with all respect to anyone, but I have to say it again. No disrespect to anyone. I chuckle when I hear talk about the U.S. taking down China, a country of 1.8 billion people. The U.S. is going to be asset stripping China. The U.S. is going to hem in China, a country of 1.8 billion people. So my question is, I'm wondering, what is your buy date? That's BY date. What is your buy date for war with China? Next year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? Thank you.
So once again, I take that as a rhetorical question.
No, it's an actual question.
And I think we've already addressed that.
Yes, let's go
We
on.
only have 7 minutes left in this meeting.
Yeah, I think maybe Gene and then Raj, please.
Okay. I just want to comment on what Sharon just said, that we're moving from mutual assured destruction, MAD, to nuclear use tactically and strategically, or nuts. So that's my comment on that.
Very good. And thank you for keeping that short. Raj, you're on next.
Yeah, Gerry, it seems to me that having nuclear weapons is associated in an aggressive sense with imperialism. In other words, Britain, France, of course, foremost United States, is different than the other nations that have it, which are actually doing for defense, basically because they perceive a threat from United States. So it seems to me, until United States, Britain, and France are lowered down from imperial stage down to being just one another country, it would be difficult to denuclearize in the world. I just want your reaction to it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's basically my understanding also, Raj. That's why I think the big problem here is U.S. imperialism, and then until that's diminished and reversed, we're going to continue to have an issue with nuclear weapons, because these guys are never going to let go of their nuclear weapons. They're building new nuclear weapons. They're modernizing the entire nuclear triad. They're developing first strike strategies. I mean, it's real stuff. There may not be any dates on it, but this is what's being prepared, and what could all too easily take place.
Thank you. We're just about at the end of our session, Gerry. But are there any sort of final thoughts you'd like to leave with us, or tasks that you want to give us to do?
I wish I were prepared for that. I think this is a really good discussion, and it just, I'm never put myself forward on an expert on these things. I'm a generalist. But I'm learning more about nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons strategies all the time, even from having this discussion with you all. And I guess I think that we could deepen this discussion, and we should all try to do so going forward. The whole idea that Sharon and others raised about integrating opposition to nuclear weapons and educating people about the danger of nuclear weapons as part of our organizing against war and imperialism. It should be a part and parcel of what we do, because it certainly remains a very disturbing risk that hangs over all of humanity. And so I think we all need to re-engage creatively and with a good anti-imperialist perspective in building the movement against nuclear weapons, along with the movement against war and genocide and militarism and imperialism.
Thank you, Gerry, and want to express our gratitude for the work that peace activists like you have been doing. Veterans for Peace has been exemplary and very important. So keep up the good work. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and your comments. They're very helpful today.
Yeah, I enjoyed the discussion a lot. Thanks so much.
So please join us next week, August 24, where Carl Sanchez will be speaking on socialism with Russian characteristics. Until then, have a good day. So long.